Levin discusses in his text the federal civil rights law that prohibits sexual-based discrimination called Title IX. Levin says the clear anti-discrimination language of Title IX was interpreted to permit single-sex programs to repair the effects of past discrimination. This has resulted in programs which amount to preference for females, says Levin. In most cases, Title IX was understood to mandate whatever procedures are necessary to ensure statistical equality of outcome for the sexes. Title IX became the justification cited by university administration for imposing limits on the employment of men. It has extensive consequences for athletics, as schools have been required to treat female athletes better than males who have the same athletic ability. Levin points out that the funds used to get schools to discriminate against men have coercively been collected from the public. Sex equality, as applied to sports, involves the feminist claim females are as innately gifted at athletics as males, that female performance deficiencies are caused by girls being socialized away from strenuous activities, and that in a world free of sexist stereotyping, half the quarterbacks in the NFL would be women. Levin rejects the feminist claim females are as innately gifted as males at sports because he sees innate biological sex differences as giving men a clear advantage. He says he has been unable to locate a single feminist source which absolutely acknowledges an innate sex difference in the physical factors relevant to performance, even though most radical feminists are supposed to acknowledge anatomical differences between men and women. He says the reason for this reluctance is clear. Once differences in outcome for men and women in any area of society is acknowledged to be based on biology, common sense will want to explain other aspects of society in terms of biology as well. It's extremely unlikely that innate sex differences manifest themselves in sports and nowhere else. Faced with this dilemma, feminists simply deny or ignore innate sex differences. Sex differences in physical strength have been studied extensively by the U.S. Army. Women have about 55 to 58% of the upper body strength of men. The average woman is only about 80% as strong as a man of identical weight. Women exhibit only 60% of the shoulder strength of men. Levin says females can't hold their own to males in sports. There might be a handful of females who could hold their own with the college basketball varsity in some divisions of play, but it is doubtful that any female could play in the NBA. There is a feminist demand that equal financial attention be paid to both sexes when it comes to sports, that scholarships should be equalized and coaches of women's teams should be paid as much as men's teams. Levin says this demand raises questions of practicality. Colleges profit from their major sports, and girls' sports do not attract the gait of boys' sports. Asking male and female athletics to be funded on equal levels involves asking male athletics to financially support female athletics, or to terminate some male athletic programs so female athletic programs can be further funded. Levin mentions the men's athletic teams that have been cut to afford matching girls' teams. The large number of medals won by female athletes in the 1984 Olympics was widely cited at the time as vindicating Title IX. But less recognition was given to those American males who might have won medals had their funds for their training had not been eliminated due to Title IX. This was a burden placed on them by the state simply because they happened to be males. Levin says colleges are legally required to reserve scholarships for females who are inferior in ability to hundreds of males who, presumably, would eagerly compete for these scholarships if the law allowed sex-neutral standards. In 1984, as a condition for holding the New York Marathon, the city of New York demanded that the female winner's prize money equal the males. This demand was made and accepted by the organizers of the marathon, knowing that dozens of men would beat the best female and yet win nothing. Levin points out that no more than 18% of the runners in the New York Marathon had ever been female, but the winning female receives exactly what the male receives for beating all of his competition. Levin further discusses the conflict between sexual egalitarianism and merit. Sports, more than any other activity, connects merit to reward. Athletic excellence is readily detectable, and detected by fans eager to pay to see it. Small differences in athletic ability can make large differences. The difference between the best male marathon time and female marathon time guarantees that dozens of men will always beat the fastest woman. Any woman who sets her heart on running the world's fastest marathon is going to be disappointed. Feminists most often say that girls participating in sports will lead them to become more like men while retaining their femininity. That girls will humanize sports while becoming toughened by controlled competition. At the same time, boys will learn not to regard sports as an occasion for dominance. Levin says this idea of not seeing sports as an occasion for dominance makes little sense in terms of sports themselves. Sports are inseparable from competitiveness. Those who do not care about winning are eliminated from the field quickly, leaving only the more competitive. Non-competitive sports would not be enjoyable. Levin thinks that the goal of psychologically strengthening girls through acquainting them with victory through sports is incompatible with them knowing that they are inferior to a multitude of boys who are barred from competing with them. Making the Little League team through lawsuit can hardly instill pride. Levin goes on to discuss in his text male-female integrated military. He points out that the armed services have traditionally been filled by men. However, feminist assumptions have influenced American military policy since the 1970s. No nation has ever employed women to the extent to which they are now employed in the U.S. military. The issue isn't whether women have a place in the police or military. They clearly do. Police departments need women for surveillance, undercover work, administrative chores, and to guard female prisoners. Women in the military have served admirably in medical and intelligence services. But this has nothing to do with the demand for an integrated 50% female armed services with women in combat and included in any future drafts. Levin says this emphasis on fully integrated military is vital to the conceptual purity of feminism. If protective roles have fallen to just men for biological reasons, there ends the theory that all gender role differentiation is a social construct. If women can be accepted into an environment as hostile to traditional femininity as combat, there could be no objection to changing any other sex role. The argument for complete sexual integration of the military hinges on a strong version of environmentalism. There are occasional verbal concessions by feminists that women may be on average somewhat weaker and less aggressive, but it insists that in essentials women and men have the same skills and talents as men. Levin sees no demographic need to enlist women. Nor does the increasing dependence of some aspects of war on technology require the enlistment of women, since men continue to dominate science and technology. Feminists insist on special measures to compensate for female deficiencies at tasks associated with violence, like easier physical testing requirements for women. Levin says that ultimately, feminist ideology requires the functions of the army to be revised to conform to female abilities. It is argued by feminists simultaneously that women can fight as well as men, and also that women bring a valuable gentling influence to the military. Feminist author Betty Friedan writes that a combat officer who weeps during battle makes a more effective leader than one who puts on a facade of courage. Levin sees problems with these special measures for women. Female strength deficiency is a significant issue. Most of what soldiers do is physical. This entails limitations on how females can participate in the military. Levin goes on to discuss physical requirements for Army and Air Force being either eliminated or made significantly easier for women. In 1981, the Army undertook a review of its assignments of women to physically demanding positions and positions near combat, called its Women in the Army Policy Review. It found that 90% of the Army's positions call for upper body strength. 74% of Army personnel must lift at least 65 to 85 pounds. A number of positions require lifting over 100 pounds with frequent lifting of 50 pounds. Even though 3% of women can perform very heavy tasks, as opposed to 80% of men, the Army had assigned 42% of its women to very heavy tasks. Levin says these statistics even actually overstate female strength as it relates to military service. These statistics are frequently based on single trial tests, rather than repetitions performed under time limitations. So for example, 11% of the females tested in the Women in the Pharmacy Policy Review study could lift 100 pounds as opposed to 92% of the men tested. But Levin says a more realistic question is if the number of women able to lift 100 pounds on a sustained basis, as soldiers must do in combat. Given the known differences in muscle mass, aerobic power, and endurance, repetitions of the tasks in the Women in the Army Policy Review study would probably disclose even greater sex differences. The most common defense of these relaxed standards is that women can do whatever men can do given extra time and training. But Levin says this ignores two critical features of warfare. First, every second counts in battle. Lives depend on if a box of M16 ammo is being carried or dragged over exposed ground. Second, the planning of military maneuvers requires a high degree of certainty about the capabilities of each soldier. Only if a commanding officer is sure all of his men can run 3 7-minute and 30-second miles can he confidently order his men to be at a point 3 miles away in 23 minutes. Only a strictly applied training requirement can allow him to be certain. Levin says that given the best faith in the world to sexual egalitarians, their claims about tests for combat effectiveness to show women are as capable as men are empty. No physical or psychological tests for combat fitness truly exist. Combat is so different from any other environment that psychological simulation of it is impossible. It is absurd to try to detect this minuscule female population that can fight when men have historically shown to be effective fighting units. Levin points out that sexual integration of the armed services is expensive. It is not clear why millions of dollars must be spent to find the one woman in 1,000 able and willing to lift heavy truck tires when there will always be someone in an all-male motor pool who can lift them. The U.S. military has spent a great deal of money on a wide variety of special provisions for women, like redesigning army boots, seats in helicopters, underwear and trousers, flash vests, gas masks, helmets, and uniforms. They've had to spend money on the duplication of field clothes changing units, baths, and latrine facilities. The medical support base of the military has had to be expanded to include physicians with expertise in gynecological problems. Pregnancy is another issue unique to sexually integrated military. At any time, 10 to 15% of the females in the Army are pregnant. It must be contended with that female soldiers will not report for duty because they cannot find babysitters. In the event of emergency, pregnant female soldiers in critical positions will have to be evacuated and others will be absent from duty seeking shelter for their babies. An argument for women in fighting positions is that the next war will be fought by technicians pushing buttons, and women are just as capable as men in this regard. Levin sees this argument overlooking sex differences that go far beyond difference in physical strength. Women are more likely to see their target as people. This could lead to a response that may inhibit females from pushing the button at the critical moment. Assigning women to button-pushing positions is an unnecessary gamble, says Levin, since men, not women, have historically demonstrated the ability to treat war as a game and kill impersonally on command. Levin says sexually integrated military can hurt troop morale. There are many things that can go wrong in a mission with even the best planning and adequate supplies. Gender conflicts offer one more unnecessary variable that can hinder a mission. Over the centuries, male soldiers have undergone various forms of hazing that have been part of the honing process that helps form them into a war machine. Such rites of initiation would likely be perceived by women as sexual harassment when it has no such function. There is reluctance of many men to subordinate themselves to a woman. Orders given by women may lack the psychological weight that attends orders given by men. One manifestation of male dominance aggression is the male desire to dominate male-female encounters. Male competition for women can be disruptive. Falling in love can emotionally distract attention from important military goals. Male bonding is inclusive and builds a small group of men into effective fighting units. Unlike male-female bonding, it excludes competing loyalties. The brawling, drinking, vulgarity, and sexual bragging of young men in groups cement the male bond. Young men in groups often risk death rather than be thought screw-ups by their male companions and authority figures. The universal aversion to seeing women slaughtered also counts against the effectiveness of a sexually integrated military. Levin talks about how other protective services have been forced to abandon the use of sex-neutral standards. He discusses the attempt to sex-integrate the police and fire departments. In 1977, 88 women filed a class-action sex discrimination lawsuit in federal court against the New York City Fire Department because they failed the entrance exam physical component. The court found in favor of the plaintiffs, agreeing the strength test was not job-related. The court ordered the New York Fire Department to construct a special, less demanding physical examination for female candidates, with males still held to the more difficult standard. Instead of hiring the highest scorers on its combined written and physical tests, the New York Police Department hires at random among candidates whose combined scores exceed a minimum cutoff. In 1985, the New York Police Department announced that it intended to make a physical test easier, since 30% of female applicants, as opposed to 1% of males, failed it. And it was announced the New York Police Department would be sued if it kept the test. Levin addresses the position that sexist language where mankind refers to both men and women and the generic he refers to both men and women is equivalent to racist language. Feminist objections to current speech patterns are they reflect the inferior state of women and that they insult women by making them invisible. Levin objects to these quote-unquote sexist words like mankind being understood as misleading because no one is misled. Nearly everyone understands that mankind refers to both men and women. Levin sees the charge that he and mankind slight women by referring to them by words that refer to men alone as silly. An insult essentially involves the intention of causing offense to someone through the person recognizing that what was communicated was done to offend. Whatever the reason that the collective name for males is also the collective name for males and females, no one adopted this usage with the intention of causing feelings of shame. The N-word, however, has historically been said with the intention to express contempt for a black person. The generic he has no similar history. Levin devotes a considerable amount of his text to discussing the relationship between feminism and family. Feminism sees the family under patriarchy as a one-sided sexual bargain where the wife settles for exploitation. Levin sees it beyond reasonable doubt that many thousands of marriages have been ruined as couples have tried to conform their sex lives to feminist imperatives. A woman will not find sexual satisfaction with a man who has internalized the belief that he must not be dominant, but treat her as an equal. Housework is a particular object of feminist scorn, and there is a feminist preoccupation with the most negative aspects of motherhood. One can read the entire corpus of feminist writing without learning that most women find motherhood their greatest satisfaction. Women's innate desire to care for their children is the simplest explanation of the universal expectation that women will be the ones to do it. The idea that men could mother children as diligently as women if suitably socialized does not withstand empirical data. There is abundant direct evidence of mechanisms that bond mothers to newborns during the first hours after birth. Feminist Betty Friedan talks about how women need both children and power, identity, status, and security through their own work. Thus, women need childcare options and restructured jobs, flexible working hours, and maternity leave. Levin says rates of childlessness, divorce, and failure to marry rise steeply for women in careers. The principal critic of the idea that work should be arranged that any woman, any mother, can claim her right to work at a dignified and well-paid job are children. Children are uninterested in their mother's personal growth. Children are not shy at demanding attention at inconvenient times. And children will not take a half hour of quality time is compensation for a day's absence. Anne Oakley argued in Sex, Gender, and Society that a woman need only devote 3% of her lifetime to child rearing and devote the rest to a career. She calculates that a woman will wish to take it easy during the final months of pregnancy and care for her child through infancy for a total of about 2.5 years out of a lifetime of 75. Levin objects that this estimate assumes that a woman will have one child who will no longer need care at age 2. More realistic assumptions involve a woman who will have at least 2 or 3 children. She will wish to spend at least 3 years with each one, with the pregnancy spaced out. She will thus spend a decade in maternal pursuits during the years crucial for career development, make it impossible for her to realize herself to the same extent men do. The absolute practical limit on the number of children that can be born by a woman interested in full-time work is 2. Levin has concerns for how a society can survive with such a low replacement rate of 2 children per household. If society disappears due to so few pregnancies, it will be pointless to wonder how the women in that society can flourish. The demand for publicly subsidized daycare usually employs the language of freedom. The argument is made that not funding daycare keeps women in the home, while funding it gives women the freedom to stay or leave. But Levin says publicly funded childcare achieves no gain in liberty, since those forced to pay for it through tax dollars don't get to decide what to do with their money. Regarding daycare, Levin mentions the large-scale rearing of children by strangers is new to human history. So it is wise to place the burden of proof on those who advocate children being raised by nannies that it does no harm. Maternal care is more likely to produce happy, autonomous adults than care by paid nannies. Clinicians are unanimous that a child needs the complete attention of his mother for at least his first year and continuity in his personal caretaker for at least his first 3 years for the best chance for acceptable personal relations later in life. In every society, a child's upbringing has been the responsibility of close blood relations, with his daily care a female task and protection a male task. According to standard theory of personality, autonomous growth is best fostered by a strong male figure and a nurturing female figure. Children originally learn to control their impulses as a means of gaining their parents' love. Lack of self-control will later result in abnormal readiness for aggression. His mother's unconditional love teaches him that he is basically good. His father's respect instills a sense that he is competent. Later in life, a boy will have to win the love of a woman and the respect of other men. Happy experiences with his parents serve to give him confidence that he will succeed. Feminism has caused a major rift in discussion of child rearing. From discussion of what is good for children during the years that their personalities are most influenced by their parents, to how soon this period can be gotten over so mothers can get back to the important business of working. Levin says feminism is born out of hatred towards men and self-hatred. He suggests that feminist rage is directed at the father. This helps to explain feminist dislike for womanhood. The briefest glimpse at feminist classics will uncover descriptions of traditional women as small-minded, jealous, irrational, dependent, selfish, possessive, and passive. Feminists will add they like women, per se, but are only describing what has become of women under patriarchy. Levin rejects this distinction. Women have always been this way. To dislike what something has always been, in this case women, is to dislike the thing itself. It is not femininity in the abstract that feminists hate, but their own femininity. Nothing could have produced this anger at men and hatred of self but a childhood where femaleness went unconfirmed by a bad father with perhaps a domineering mother. This fatherly neglect produced feelings of disappointment that festered into resentment against the man who failed her. This data is consistent with the social background of the most prominent first-generation feminists and their followers at universities. Many of their fathers worked at hard, often unprestigious jobs and were emotionally withdrawn in the home. Some psychiatrists see the emotional tone of feminism as an adolescent fear of the transition to womanhood. Distrust of ordinary heterosexual intercourse, celebration of homosexuality, abortion, and the general absence of sexual restraint is also reminiscent of the adolescent girl's fear of the sexual consequences of growing up. Feelings of self-hatred by feminists are resolved by projecting these feelings onto society. The feminist then confirms her belief that society hates women by endlessly becoming angry with imaginary enemies. The feminist is one characterized by an obsession with powerlessness and a constant sense of threat, believing that only what men do is perceived to have any value. The entry of women into the workforce also contributed to the rise of feminism, but not because of the discrimination they discovered in the workforce. The entry of women into the labor force occurred in large cities where they lived away from paternal supervision, together with the invention of the automobile and, later, the contraceptive pill, helped make casual sex more feasible than at any other previous time. The sexual revolution created the expectation that women would consent to sex at any time. However, the female's genetic programming for seeking commitment from males was not eliminated by the contraception pill. Women were now torn between the new rules of sexual compliance and her age-old biological impulse to hold back. This created resentment against men who she felt duty-bound to sleep with. Men can't be blamed for the resentment women have for sleeping with them. Men acted in character throughout the sexual revolution, seeking as always to implant their seed as much as possible. What changed was now for the first time in human history, there was a lack of female noncompliance for men to control their promiscuous impulses. Having been instructed that there is no longer a distinction between chaste, classy women and whores, men began treating all women as whores. Feminists in search of culprits for the perpetual adolescence of the contemporary male might begin by looking in the mirror. It's possible the women continuing to compete against men has led men to shirk their responsibilities towards women. Levin says restoring the male sense of responsibility may require withdrawal of women from male areas and a renewal of the traditional femininity that feminists despise. Levin is not optimistic that women will creep to a position of equality with men, or that female participation in traditionally male activities will continue at the level it does. Success in pursuits outside of the family goes against deep-seated female impulses. Women romantically seek men of higher status than themselves. For the same reason, females have historically sought to mate with the alpha male who has proven his ability to protect her and her offspring. The higher a woman climbs in a hierarchy, the fewer men she will find appealing. Since males prefer to dominate sexual bonding pairs, the fewer men she will appeal to. Male and female genetic inclinations make a far greater impact than feminists believe they do. Feminists, in the end, are asking women to make themselves unattractive to men and to forego love and children. Levin believes feminism will eventually be forgotten, commanding only the loyalty of barren women whose genetic lines are running to extinction.